The harsh clink of old coins rattled against the supermarket counter, the sound sharp and out of place amid the hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic beeping of scanners. It was the kind of sound that made strangers glance up, uncomfortable, then look away as quickly as possible. Jack Carter's hand trembled as he pushed forward what little he had: three worn quarters, a tarnished nickel, and a handful of tired pennies that had lived too long in his pocket. His palm was rough, cracked from endless days of odd jobs, but the coins slipped from his grasp as if even they were reluctant to leave him. "That's not enough," the cashier said flatly, her voice weary and detached. She didn't bother to raise her eyes from the glowing screen. "You're short 87 cents. Jack froze. His chest tightened, and the words caught in his throat. He had rehearsed this moment in his head, what he would say if it ever happened. But now, standing there under the humming lights, he found himself mute. Behind him, his daughter Emma began to cry. Not the playful whine of a toddler who wants a candy bar, but the aching, raw cry of a child too tired and too hungry to pretend anymore. Strapped into the faded plastic seat of the cart, her chubby legs kicked weakly, her cheeks red and sticky from the crumbs of a half-eaten cracker. Her wide, watery eyes searched for comfort that Jack couldn't give. Jack forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Could you just take the wipes off?" His voice was low, almost apologetic, as though asking for one more inch of dignity. "You didn't buy wipes," the cashier replied briskly. Jack's gaze fell. He hadn't. He couldn't. On the conveyor belt, there was only one item: a pack of cheap size 3 diapers. Nothing more. That was all he thought he could afford. He shoved his hand into his pocket again, fingers sifting through lint, scraps of paper, and dust. Then, by some miracle, his fingertip brushed something metallic. A quarter. He pulled it out with relief, but as he did, another small penny slipped free and hit the tiled floor with a mocking clink. He dropped to his knees instantly. The floor was cold, biting through his jeans. His knees ached, a dull pain he was used to ignoring. As he fumbled for the coin, Emma's cries softened. She reached her tiny hands toward his head, tugging gently at his messy hair, as if she were the one trying to console him. Jack looked up at her and managed a tender smile. "Almost there, baby girl. Almost there." The line behind him shifted restlessly. Someone sighed loudly. Another cleared their throat in irritation. Judgment weighed heavy in the stale air, pressing against his back. He rose slowly, knees stiff, and placed the rescued coin on the counter as though it were gold. Every cent mattered. The cashier finally looked up, unimpressed. "Still short, 87. Jack's throat tightened. He was ready to tell her to put the diapers back, though the thought tore him apart. Emma needed them. She deserved more than his failure. But then, before he could speak, a voice rose from behind him. Calm, steady, clear. "I'll cover it." Jack turned, stunned. A woman stood there, poised and confident. She looked a little over 30, tall, with a cream-colored coat draped neatly over her shoulders. Blonde curls tumbled carelessly down one side, framing a face that carried both elegance and weariness, like someone who had fought too many quiet battles. In her basket were baby food jars, a soft giraffe plush, and an organic shampoo bottle. "Ring it all up together," she told the cashier with quiet authority. Then she looked at Jack. Her expression wasn't pity. It wasn't superiority. It was something else. Something raw and deeply human. "Please, let me." Jack blinked, caught between pride and gratitude. Emma sniffled, her cries tapering into hiccups as she stared at the woman's soft smile. "And add some wipes and fruit pouches," the woman added gently. Jack's chest constricted. The words he wanted to speak tangled in his throat. His lips parted, but no sound came. The woman raised a graceful hand. "You don't owe me anything. Your daughter deserves to go home clean and with a full belly. That's all." Jack's eyes stung. He hadn't felt seen like this in years. The restless silence of the line behind them shifted. Some still judged, but others seemed to lower their gaze, shamed by the simple act of compassion they had just witnessed. The cashier bagged the diapers, wipes, fruit pouches, and the giraffe plush. Jack gripped the handle tightly, the weight heavier than he expected, not just from the items, but from what they represented. He turned to the woman, his eyes red. His voice broke as he whispered, "I'm not a beggar." Her gaze didn't waver. "I know," she replied softly. "I never thought you were." Jack dropped his eyes, uneasy. He hated kindness. It made him nervous. Too often it came with invisible strings. But her words lingered, pressing against old scars he thought had hardened long ago. "When I was a child," she said quietly, "there were nights without diapers too. I remember the cold, the shame, the way people looked at my mom when she asked for help. I don't do this out of pity. I do it because I understand." Jack's hardened eyes flickered, the steel in them softening. Emma giggled suddenly, distracted by the giraffe plush sticking out of the bag. Jack adjusted her in the cart, and when he looked back, his resistance had cracked just enough. "Thank you," he whispered. The woman smiled, not wide, not showy, just enough to radiate sincerity. "You're welcome." Jack pushed the cart toward the sliding doors. The cold evening air rushed in as they opened, brushing against his weary face. Each step to the parking lot was a blend of relief and shame. He had accepted help, something he swore he'd never do. By the clearance rack near the exit, he paused. He pulled out one of the expensive fruit pouches the woman had added, stared at it for a long moment, then placed it gently back on the shelf. He would keep the essentials, the diapers, the wipes, the giraffe that already coaxed smiles from Emma. The rest he didn't need. His own rule: take only what you can't return. Back at his dented old van, he strapped Emma into her car seat. The vehicle smelled faintly of worn leather and motor oil. Emma clutched the giraffe to her chest like a trophy, babbling happily. Jack slid into the driver's seat. He caught his reflection in the cracked rearview mirror, tired, rugged, but for the first time in years, carrying a flicker of something else. Hope. He whispered, almost inaudible, "I'm not a beggar." And for the first time in a long time, he started to believe it. The evening air clung heavy as Jack carried Emma up the narrow staircase of their apartment building, each creaking step echoing his fatigue. The building itself was tired, paint peeling, hallway lights flickering, the smell of stale cigarettes lingering from neighbors who never opened their windows. Emma rested against his shoulder, the giraffe plush in her arms, humming soft baby sounds that made the weight of the groceries seem lighter. Their apartment was small, 2 rooms, one barely large enough to count as a bedroom, the other doubling as a kitchen, living room, and dining space. The floor tiles were chipped, the second-hand sofa sagged, and the thin curtains barely kept out the city's glow. Yet Jack kept it neat, almost obsessively so. If he couldn't give Emma abundance, he would at least give her order. He set the grocery bag on the chipped counter and unbuckled Emma from her coat. She toddled across the room in her little socks, plopping down with the giraffe. Her giggle filled the space, cutting through the silence that so often pressed against Jack's chest like a weight. Jack leaned against the counter watching her. His hand lingered on the diapers and wipes, his throat tightening. They weren't just supplies, they were survival. They were proof he hadn't failed her, at least not today. But even as relief trickled in, shame tugged at him. He hated the way people looked at him in the store, the muttered impatience, the cashier's flat tone. Worse, he hated how quickly he had accepted help. "I'm not a beggar," he muttered again under his breath, though it sounded more like a prayer than a statement. Emma crawled over to him, tugging at his pant leg. Jack knelt, scooping her into his arms. Her cheeks were warm against his stubbled face, her tiny hands grasping at his shirt collar. In her innocence, there was no judgment, no pride, no humiliation, only trust. And in that trust, Jack felt both crushed and uplifted. Crushed because he feared failing her. Uplifted because she believed he never would. He set her in the battered crib by the window and covered her with the thin quilt that had once belonged to his mother. Emma drifted off quickly, clutching the giraffe against her cheek. Jack stood for a long time just watching her breathe, her chest rising and falling with quiet steadiness. When she was finally asleep, he collapsed onto the couch. The springs groaned under his weight. He rubbed his hands over his face, rough palms scraping against tired skin. The image of the woman at the supermarket kept replaying, the clarity in her voice, the calm strength in her eyes. She had seemed like someone who carried her own shadows, yet still chose to step into someone else's. Jack hated needing anyone, but her words, "She deserves to go home clean and with a full belly," cut through his defenses. It wasn't about him, it was about Emma. He stared at the ceiling, cracked paint spiderwebbing across it, and whispered to himself, she was right. The next morning, the alarm buzzed at 6. Jack rolled off the couch stiffly, his back aching from the lumpy cushions. He brewed a thin cup of coffee, more water than strength, and pulled on his grease-stained work coveralls. He didn't have a steady job, but he made rounds to local shops, offering to fix engines, patch tires, or do whatever paid cash under the table. He carried Emma across the hall to Carmen's apartment, the retired neighbor who had taken to watching the baby whenever she could. Carmen, with her soft gray hair and no-nonsense warmth, opened the door before he knocked. "There's my sweet girl," she said, reaching for Emma with practiced arms. Emma squealed, already used to the smell of cinnamon and fabric softener that clung to Carmen's sweaters. "Thanks again," Jack said, handing over the diaper bag. His voice was low, embarrassed, though Carmen had never once judged him. "You work hard, Jack," she said firmly. "Don't apologize for that." Then with a playful wink, "And don't forget, my car's clutch is still making that noise. Bring your tools tonight." Jack managed a faint smile. "I'll take a look." He kissed Emma's forehead and headed out into the chilly morning, his boots striking against the cracked sidewalk. By noon, Jack was bent under the hood of an old pickup in a friend's makeshift garage, grease staining his forearms, sweat stinging his eyes. The work was steadying. It gave his hands something to do while his mind wrestled with the whirlwind of yesterday. Between tightening bolts and checking hoses, he caught himself replaying the moment when she had stepped forward in that grocery line. The tone in her voice had been familiar somehow, though he couldn't place why. She hadn't looked at him like everyone else had, with disdain, with quiet pity. She had looked at him like she understood. That unsettled him more than anything. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the streets with an amber glow, Jack was back at the apartment building. Emma was waiting at Carmen's, cookie crumbs on her cheeks, and a shy smile that melted away every ounce of exhaustion in his body. He carried her home, balancing her on his hip as she babbled stories only she understood. He laughed softly, tired but content, because in her laughter was his reason to keep going. Back in the apartment, Emma tugged at the giraffe plush again, dragging it across the floor. Jack sat cross-legged beside her, the sound of traffic drifting in through the thin windows. But as the night wore on and Emma fell asleep, his thoughts returned to the mysterious woman. He didn't even know her name, yet her face was etched into his memory as if carved there. "Why'd you help me?" he whispered into the quiet room, as though she could hear him. There was no answer, only the steady breathing of his daughter. Jack lay back on the couch, pulling the thin blanket over himself. The exhaustion of the day weighed heavy, but beneath it all, a flicker of something new stirred in his chest. Not just gratitude, not just shame, hope. It was fragile, raw, vulnerable, like the first spark of a fire that might die with the slightest wind. But for the first time in years, Jack didn't push it away. He let it burn. The week passed in a blur of routine. Jack worked where he could, changing brake pads in a dim garage, patching a neighbor's leaky sink, hauling boxes at a warehouse for half a day's pay. Every dollar stretched thin, but Emma's smile made every blister, every aching muscle worth it. Still, the woman from the supermarket haunted his thoughts, her calm voice, her steady eyes. He hadn't asked her name, and she hadn't offered. Maybe that was for the best. People like her didn't belong in his world. On Thursday evening, as the sun slid behind the row of brick buildings and the city's neon signs flickered to life, Jack trudged up the stairwell of his apartment complex. His boots echoed in the narrow hall, each step heavier than the last. Emma dozed against his chest in her carrier, her little hand curled tightly around his shirt. He turned the corner toward his door and froze. A woman stood there, leaning casually against the wall beside his apartment. A cream-colored coat, blonde curls, an expression both confident and strangely gentle. It was her. Jack's chest tightened. "What are you doing here?" She straightened, a folder tucked neatly under her arm. "Looking for you." He shifted Emma higher against his chest, protective instinct rising. "How do you even know my name?" The corners of her mouth lifted in a faint smile. "It was on the receipt at the store." She extended a hand, graceful and unhurried. "I'm Evelyn." Jack didn't take her hand, his jaw clenched. "Why are you here?" Instead of answering right away, Evelyn held out the folder. "I work for a company that makes baby products. Heart Baby. We run a whole fleet of delivery vans, and they're always breaking down. Someone told me you're good with engines." Jack stared at the folder as though it might bite him. "So what? You're here to give me charity work?" Her expression didn't flinch. "No, I'm here because you're capable. And because I believe you deserve a fair shot." The hallway was silent except for Emma's soft breathing. Jack's pride screamed at him to shut the door, to protect himself from the humiliation of being someone's project. But another voice, the quieter one, reminded him of Emma's diapers, of Carmen's kindness, of nights lying awake wondering if tomorrow's odd jobs would be enough. He shifted his weight uneasy. "I don't need your pity." Evelyn's eyes softened. "It's not pity, it's a job offer, with steady pay. Take it, don't take it. That's up to you. But don't confuse opportunity with handouts." For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Jack saw something in her eyes then. Tiredness, yes, but also sincerity. No judgment, no angle, just truth. He finally muttered, "I'll think about it." "That's all I ask," she said quietly, and stepped away, her heels clicking down the hallway. Jack watched her go, the smell of her faint perfume lingering in the stale air. Emma stirred against his chest, as though sensing the shift in her father's mood. Inside the apartment, Jack laid her gently in the crib and sat on the couch with the folder unopened in his lap. His hands trembled slightly as he traced the embossed Heart Baby logo. He didn't trust people like Evelyn, not because they were cruel, but because they were kind, and kindness always felt like the most dangerous trap of all. Still, the weight of the folder was undeniable. 2 days later, Jack found himself in a different world. The Heart Baby warehouse was nothing like the greasy back alley garages he usually worked in. Bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead, illuminating rows of shiny white vans lined up like soldiers. The smell of motor oil lingered, but the space was organized, efficient, almost clinical. Jack stood at the edge, his hands shoved deep into his worn jacket pockets, trying not to look out of place. Evelyn walked beside him, her heels clicking confidently on the concrete. "This is where you'd be," she explained. "Routine maintenance, emergency repairs, whatever's needed. The pay is steady, the hours flexible, and," she glanced at Emma, who sat in her stroller clutching her giraffe, "you could bring her with you if you had to." Jack crouched beside a van, running his calloused fingers along the hood. The machine was familiar, grounding. He opened the hood, peering at the engine with practiced eyes. "You're missing a belt here," he said after a moment. "And this hose is cracked. Won't last long in the heat." One of the drivers nearby looked over, surprised. "We just had that service last week." Jack grunted. "Then they didn't do it right." Evelyn's lips curved in the faintest smile. "See? That's why I want you here." Jack straightened, wiping his hands on his jeans. Pride warred with exhaustion inside him. He didn't want to owe anyone. But maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about owing. Maybe it was about building something that could finally hold. He exhaled slowly, then nodded once. "I'll take it." Evelyn's expression softened, relief flickering across her face. "Good. I'll have the paperwork ready by Monday." Jack met her gaze, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause. There was something familiar there, though he couldn't place it. That night, back in his apartment, Jack sat on the couch watching Emma play with blocks on the floor. She stacked them with clumsy determination, then clapped when they toppled. He laughed, a sound he hadn't heard from himself in too long. He looked at her, his daughter, his reason, and whispered, "Maybe things are about to change, kiddo." Emma squealed in delight, as though she understood. And for the first time in years, Jack allowed himself to believe that hope wasn't just a dangerous dream. It might actually be the beginning of something real. The Heart Baby garage was nothing glamorous, just a converted warehouse behind the main offices, where the smell of gasoline lingered and old oil stains darkened the concrete floor. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, buzzing like tired bees, and the walls were scarred with years of dents and scratches from tools and tires. But to Jack, it was something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. On his first morning, he showed up before sunrise. Emma strapped against his chest in a carrier, her small breaths steady against him. He carried a battered toolbox, the same one he'd hauled from one odd job to the next. This time, though, he wasn't here for a quick cash repair. He was here for something steady, something official. He set Emma's blanket in a corner of the garage. Beside an old tire he turned into a makeshift playseat. She squealed, tapping her tiny hands against the rubber, already amused. Jack chuckled softly. "There you go, Commander. Your space capsule." He pulled off his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and went to work on the first van. His hands moved with muscle memory, checking belts, tightening bolts, making notes in a small notebook he carried. Every detail mattered to him. He could be broke, he could be worn down, but he would never be dishonest in his work. That was his one unbreakable rule. By mid-morning, a few of the company drivers gathered near the entrance, coffee cups in hand. They watched Jack curiously, not sure what to make of the new guy who worked with his baby, humming happily in the background. But soon whispers spread. He knew what he was doing. Van 7's running smoother than it has in months, one muttered. Guy doesn't waste time, another said. Respect wasn't something Jack asked for. It was something he earned, one tightened bolt at a time. On Thursday, the rhythm of the garage shifted. The sharp click of heels echoed across the floor, a sound so out of place in that rough space, it made Jack glance up immediately. Evelyn stepped through the door, the cream-colored coat gone, replaced with a simple navy dress and a soft scarf. Even here, she carried herself with calm authority. The smell of motor oil hit her instantly, but she didn't flinch. Instead, her eyes found Emma, who was perched inside a spare tire, waving a piece of tubing around like it was a magic wand. Is that safe? Evelyn asked, her tone light but teasing. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, smirking faintly. No fluid inside, she's just testing the lunar landing gear. Emma squealed as if agreeing. Evelyn knelt down laughing, a sound clear, unguarded, and startlingly warm. And what's her mission? To get to the moon, Jack replied, tightening a wrench. This is her training module. The laugh that spilled from Evelyn's lips filled the garage in a way no fluorescent light ever could. Jack froze for half a second, feeling something stir in his chest, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. From then on, Evelyn appeared more often than he expected. Sometimes she came with documents for the drivers, sometimes with replacement parts, and sometimes, Jack suspected, with no real reason at all. Emma began to recognize the sound of her heels. Each time Evelyn stepped inside, the toddler squealed and waved her giraffe plush with both hands. Evelyn would scoop her up without hesitation, carrying her on her hip like it was second nature. She trusts you, Jack said once, his voice low as he scrubbed a carburetor. Evelyn brushed a strand of hair from her face, her eyes lingering on Emma's giggles. Maybe because she can tell I trust her too. The words sat heavy in Jack's chest. One rainy afternoon, the rhythm of clanging tools and engine hums was broken by Jack's frantic footsteps. He pushed into the garage, Emma cradled tight against him. Her cheeks were flushed, her forehead hot against his hand. She's burning up, he said hoarsely, his eyes wide with fear. I was gonna take her to urgent care, but my van won't start. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She grabbed her keys. Let's go. The storm outside hammered against the windshield as Evelyn drove, wipers working furiously. Jack sat in the back seat, holding Emma close, whispering desperate reassurances, though his hands shook. Evelyn's knuckles turned white against the steering wheel, her jaw tight with focus. At urgent care, Jack didn't leave Emma's side for a second. Evelyn handled the paperwork, speaking with calm clarity, her presence steady where his panic threatened to spiral. The doctor emerged after what felt like hours. Just a fever, nothing serious. A little medicine, plenty of fluids. She'll be fine. Jack collapsed onto a bench, his head dropping into his hands. Emma, half asleep now, breathed softly against his chest. Relief flooded him so fast it left him dizzy. Evelyn sat beside him quietly. She didn't smile, didn't offer platitudes. Instead, she said simply, "You're a good father, Jack." His throat tightened. He couldn't look at her. "I'm just trying." "That's enough," she said firmly. For the first time in years, someone's words sank past his armor. The weeks blurred into a rhythm. Evelyn stopped by the garage more often, sometimes with boxes of parts, sometimes with little snacks Emma devoured happily. Jack didn't call it friendship. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was something steady, something real. At night, he found himself replaying the sound of her laugh, the sight of her cradling Emma, the calm strength in her eyes. He tried to push it away, afraid of what it meant, afraid of hoping too much. But hope once sparked is hard to smother. One afternoon, Jack sat with Evelyn on the edge of a workbench while Emma slept wrapped in a blanket nearby. They drank bitter coffee from the vending machine, steam rising faintly in the dim light. "Never thought I'd feel at home in a place like this," Evelyn admitted, glancing around the grease-streaked walls. Jack raised an eyebrow. "What, between the oil stains and busted engines?" She laughed softly. No, between the noise and the grit, there's something warm here. Jack looked at her, the words sticking in his throat. He knew exactly what she meant. Because in that garage, for the first time in years, he felt it too. By the time they got back from urgent care, the storm had settled into a tired drizzle. Streetlights threw hazy halos across puddles on the cracked pavement, and the city felt quieter, like it had exhaled along with Jack. He carried Emma up the stairs, one slow step at a time, her head heavy on his shoulder. The fever reducer had done its job. Her skin wasn't burning anymore, but her body was still limp in that way that makes every parent uneasy. Evelyn followed with the diaper bag and the little paper bag from the pharmacy, moving with that steady, unhurried composure that had quietly become his anchor. Inside the apartment, Jack set Emma in her crib, tucking the thin quilt up to her chin. She blinked sleepily, the giraffe plush tucked under her arm, and let out a tiny, exhausted sigh. Jack stood there too long, just watching her chest rise and fall in a steady rhythm that finally let his heart unclench. Evelyn set the pharmacy bag on the counter and glanced around the room. He saw it through her eyes for a second. The chipped tile, the drooping curtain, the couch with its tired springs, the clean dish rack and carefully folded towels, an order carved out of scarcity. He felt exposed and oddly proud at the same time. "Coffee?" he asked, voice low. "I wouldn't say no," she answered. He brewed it thin the way he always did, more water than coffee, and poured two mismatched mugs. When he handed one to her, their fingers brushed. The contact was light, innocent, and somehow electric. Evelyn nodded toward Emma. "She'll sleep now." "Yeah," Jack said, rubbing his thumb along the rim of the mug. "She always sleeps hard after a fever breaks." His voice cracked, then steadied. "I hate how fast fear shows up. One minute you're fine, the next—" He trailed off, eyes flicking toward the crib. Evelyn didn't fill the silence. She let it breathe. "I don't panic at engines," he said after a beat, a rueful half-smile tugging at his mouth. "Engines are honest. They break for a reason. They tell you where it hurts." "And life doesn't?" she asked gently. "Life hides the leak," he said. "Lets you find it the hard way." The radiator hissed. Outside, tires hissed through puddles. Somewhere in the building, a TV murmured at low volume, a laugh track too distant to sound like joy. "Thank you," he said. It came out raw, stripped, unpolished. "For driving, for the paperwork, for not making me feel small." Her eyes softened. "You're not small," she said simply. "You're carrying a lot. Those aren't the same." He swallowed. "People usually confuse them." She wrapped both hands around her mug and studied him. Really studied him. The way you study a map when you're not sure where you are, but you know you're close. "You did everything right tonight," she said. "You listened to your gut. You moved. You stayed with her. That's the whole job." He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. When was the last time someone told him he'd done something right? They sat on the edge of the couch, both facing the crib as if the tiny rise and fall of a toddler's chest were a fireplace. "Where'd you learn to be so calm?" he asked after a while. Her mouth quirked. "I'm not always calm. You looked it tonight." "I've been in rooms where panic makes everything worse," she said, voice quiet. "Sometimes the only thing you can control is your tone." He watched her, intuition pricking again. There were miles behind her eyes. She never tossed them at him like a resume. They just lived there, steady and unflinching. "You ever get help when you needed it?" he asked. The question hung between them, intimate in a way that wasn't romantic yet, just human. "Yes," she said finally. "Once. It was small on the outside and huge on the inside. It saved me." She didn't look at him when she said it. She looked at Emma. He nodded. He didn't push. Whatever that story was, he felt the echo of it in the way she'd stood in a fluorescent grocery aisle and said, "Let me." They talked about smaller things then. About the drivers at the warehouse who were already respecting him, the ridiculous broken vending machine coffee, Carmen's cinnamon-scented sweaters, and the way Emma claimed the old tire like a throne. The conversation found a rhythm all by itself, a gentle back and forth that made the cramped apartment feel larger, lighter. A sudden little cough came from the crib, followed by a sleepy whimper. Jack stood instantly, crossing to Emma's side, laying his palm lightly against her forehead. Warm, not hot. He brushed her hair back from her face and hummed something tuneless and soft. She settled. When he turned back, he found Evelyn watching him with a look he didn't recognize at first. It wasn't pity. It wasn't admiration exactly. It was recognition, like she was seeing the shape of him clearly for the first time, not the silhouette poverty had cast. "You're good at this," she said. "I don't know what I'm doing most days," he admitted, returning to the couch. "I just try to do the next right thing. That's all any of us can do," she said. "Big plans are just 100 next right things stacked together." He huffed a laugh. "You talk like a CEO. "I talk like someone who's had to make friends with uncertainty," she said, a wry warmth in her voice. The clock over the stove clicked from 11:59 to 12, a fresh day, sneaking in without fanfare. "You should get home," he said, though a part of him didn't want the room to lose the shape it had taken with her in it. "I should," she agreed, and didn't move. They sat 1 minute longer. Then she stood, set her mug in the sink, and pulled on her coat. At the door, she paused, fingertips brushing the frame. "If anything changes overnight," she said, nodding toward the crib, "call me. I mean it." "I don't have your number," he said, then realized it sounded like a request. She smiled, the kind of smile that made the room feel briefly warmer. She took a pen from her coat pocket, scribbled on a receipt by the stove, and tore the corner free. "Now you do." He took the paper, the ink still wet. "Thank you," he said again, the words gentler this time, less jagged. "You're welcome," she said, and slipped into the hallway. The door clicked shut with a soft finality. Jack stood there a moment, the scrap of paper in his hand, the ink smudging at the edge of his thumb. He tucked it carefully into his wallet, not with the desperation of someone storing a lifeline, but with the steadiness of someone cataloging a fact. "I am not alone in this." He washed the 2 mugs, dried them, and set them upside down on the rack because routine kept his hands from shaking. Then he sank onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, listening to the small, steady sounds of his life. Emma's breathing, the hum of the fridge, the city's distant heartbeat. He thought about the way Evelyn drove through rain without flinching, the way she signed her name on forms while he couldn't make his own fingers stop shaking, the way she spoke to him like he wasn't standing on a fault line, like he was the ground itself, solid, capable, ready to hold. His mind drifted back to the grocery store, to her voice cutting through the static. "Ring it all up together. Please. Let me." He had told her he wasn't a beggar. "I know," she had said. He closed his eyes and let the truth of that settle somewhere deep. Pride was heavy. Gratitude was heavier, because it asked you to admit you were worth what you received. Sleep came in fits. He woke twice to check Emma's forehead, to watch her little mouth open and close with each breath, to pull the quilt up when she kicked it down. Each time she settled easily. Each time he felt the knot in his chest loosen one more notch. At 5:42 a.m., the room was blue and quiet. Dawn crept under the curtain like a shy guest. Jack sat on the floor beside the crib, knees bent, arms draped over them, chin resting on his forearms. He wasn't praying. He never knew how, but his thoughts felt like one anyway. He heard himself think the words before he believed them. "Maybe I can do this." He got up, brewed coffee, and packed his tools. He wrote a sticky note for Carmen in his neat, careful handwriting. "Emma had a fever, but she's okay. Call me if anything changes." He tucked Emma's jacket into the diaper bag, then changed her diaper with a gentleness that made his own chest ache. When he lifted her, she blinked up at him and smiled. Sleepy, lopsided, devastating. He kissed her forehead. "Big day," he murmured. "We're gonna fix some vans and pretend this coffee is strong." Emma patted his cheek like she approved. In the hallway they met Carmen, already in her slippers, already smelling like cinnamon. "How's my girl?" she asked, scooping Emma up with practiced arms. "Better," Jack said. "Fever broke." "And you?" Carmen asked, eyes kind and knowing. He surprised himself. "Better too." She studied him for half a second and nodded. "Good." By 8, the Heart Baby garage lights buzzed awake. Jack rolled the first van onto the lift, Emma's giggle from yesterday echoing in his mind. He checked belts, hoses, plugs. He scribbled notes. He moved with a quiet, steady focus. At 9:13, the garage door opened, and he didn't have to look up to know who it was. He felt it, like a tiny change in air pressure when a storm breaks or a door opens into a warm room. "Morning," Evelyn said, stepping inside, a paper bag in one hand and a file in the other. "I brought muffins that probably taste better than your vending machine ones." He lifted his head, and the look that passed between them wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was ordinary and enormous. The kind of look that says, we survived the night, and this is how a life begins to change. One steady kindness, one small courage, one shared moment at a time. Morning, he said and meant it. He took the bag and their fingers brushed again. Brief, unhurried, hopeful. Behind them, the vans waited. Ahead of them, something else did too. Fragile, real, and quietly unstoppable. And for the first time in a long time, Jack felt it without resisting. The ground beneath his feet wasn't slipping. It was holding. It started with a photo. Jack didn't even know someone had taken it until the next morning when Carmen knocked on his door, holding her phone out like it was a piece of bad news she didn't want to deliver. Jack, she said softly, you should see this. On the screen was an image posted to some local gossip site and already spreading like wildfire. Evelyn Hart, CEO of Hart Baby, holding Emma in the Hart Baby garage. Emma's chubby hands were tangled in Evelyn's scarf, her giggle frozen mid-frame, while Evelyn looked down at her with a smile so genuine it was impossible to fake. It should have been a sweet photo. It should have made people smile. Instead, the caption twisted it into something sharp. CEO Hart uses struggling single father and baby as PR stunt for company image. Jack's stomach dropped. His first instinct was anger. Hot, protective, raw. His second was dread. By noon, the photo had spread across news feeds. Headlines multiplied like weeds. From boardroom to baby bottle, Evelyn Hart's curious new image. CEO exploits single dad for sympathy? Hart Baby's gimmick or genuine? By evening, Evelyn's name was trending, and not in the flattering way. At the garage, the atmosphere was different. Drivers who had been nodding at Jack 2 days earlier now watched him with careful eyes, whispers curling behind his back. He felt the weight of it pressing down on him like a lead vest. Evelyn arrived late that afternoon. She looked the same, calm, composed, but Jack could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the weariness behind her steady gaze. Her scarf was missing, her coat simple, almost like she was trying to shrink herself. The moment she stepped inside, Emma squealed and reached out for her. Evelyn's face softened instantly, but she didn't move forward. She stood rooted, cautious. I shouldn't have come, she said quietly. Jack wiped his hands on a rag, his jaw tight. Why not? Because every time someone sees us together right now, it just fuels the story. He studied her face. Beneath the polished surface, she looked tired, raw, human. So what? You think hiding makes them stop? Her lips pressed into a line. It makes it hurt less. Jack shook his head, heat creeping into his voice. Not for her, he said, nodding at Emma, who was reaching out, confused by the hesitation. She doesn't care about cameras or headlines. She just knows you show up. Something flickered in Evelyn's eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or pain. Jack tossed the rag aside. You didn't fake that picture. You didn't plan it. Anyone with half a brain can see that smile was real. They don't want real, Evelyn whispered. Her voice broke in a way he hadn't heard before. They want a story that makes sense to them. Powerful woman, poor single dad, helpless child. It fits their headline. Jack stepped closer, lowering his voice. Let them talk. You know the truth. I know the truth. That's what matters. She finally looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, her composure cracked. Her eyes were glossy, her breath unsteady. Do you have any idea how many years I've fought for every inch of credibility in boardrooms full of men who thought I didn't belong? She said. And now one photo, one headline, and suddenly I'm a joke. A cliché. Jack's chest tightened. He didn't know her battles in those boardrooms, but he knew the look in her eyes. He'd seen it in his own mirror too many times. The look of someone tired of being misjudged. He reached out, his hand hovering just above her arm before finally resting there. Then we don't let them define it, he said firmly. We write our own story. The words hung there, fragile but steady, and something shifted between them. That night, Jack found himself pacing the apartment after Emma was asleep. The TV droned with yet another panel of talking heads debating Evelyn's motives, their voices sharp and dismissive. Jack muted it, staring at the screen with clenched fists. He thought about the way Evelyn had driven through the storm without hesitation. The way she'd sat in his apartment drinking weak coffee, telling him he was a good father. The way she'd smiled at Emma as though the child were her own. None of that could be captured in a headline. None of it could be faked. Jack pulled the scrap of paper from his wallet, the one with Evelyn's number, and stared at it for a long time. Then, before doubt could stop him, he dialed. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was tired. Jack? It's me, he said. His throat felt tight. I just wanted you to know I'm not running. Silence, then a quiet, almost broken laugh. You'd be the first person not to. Let them think what they want, Jack said, his voice rough but steady. They don't know us. They don't know her. He glanced toward Emma's crib. They don't know what's real. There was another pause, softer this time. Thank you, Evelyn whispered. Jack leaned against the wall, eyes closed. You don't have to thank me. Just don't disappear. I won't, she said, and he believed her. The next morning, the storm hadn't passed. Headlines still churned. Cameras still waited outside Heart Baby headquarters. But in the garage, something was different. When Evelyn walked in, she didn't hesitate this time. She crossed the floor, scooped Emma into her arms, and held her close. Jack watched the drivers glance up, whisper, and then, slowly, look away, returning to their work. The story might still rage outside, but here, in this garage, truth was louder. Jack tightened a bolt on van 12, grease staining his hands, and allowed himself the smallest of smiles. They weren't beaten, not yet. And deep down, he knew. This was only the beginning. The rain came down steady that Tuesday, tapping against the windows of the Heart Baby garage, drumming on the metal roof like a restless heartbeat. Jack stood bent over an open hood, the air thick with the smell of oil and damp concrete. Emma played nearby with her giraffe plush, humming tunelessly to herself. Jack was focused, steady, his hands moving with precision. But inside, his mind was restless. The photo scandal still lingered online. Though it was beginning to fade, the sting remained. Every time a stranger glanced too long at him in the grocery store, or one of the drivers gave him that quick, assessing look, he felt the echo of it. He had told Evelyn he wouldn't run, and he meant it, but staying put didn't make the weight disappear. The garage door opened, letting in a rush of damp air. Evelyn stepped inside, shaking droplets from her coat. She carried a leather folder, her expression calm, her eyes tired but determined. Jack straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. Emma squealed at the sight of her, dropping her toy and toddling toward her with open arms. Evelyn bent down, scooping her up with practiced ease. Hey, sweetheart, she murmured, pressing her cheek against Emma's hair. Then she looked at Jack. Can we talk? He gestured toward the break area, a small table shoved against the wall, with 2 folding chairs and a perpetually buzzing soda machine. Evelyn set the folder down carefully, still holding Emma on her hip. Jack sat across from her, wary. What's this? She slid the folder across the table. Your future, if you'll take it. Jack frowned, flipping it open. Inside were neatly typed pages, official company letterhead, and a bold title, Garage Manager, Heart Baby Logistics. He blinked. Manager? You've been running this place in practice since you walked in, Evelyn said matter-of-factly. You catch things the others don't. The vans run better under your watch. The drivers trust you. This isn't charity, Jack. It's recognition. His chest tightened. He traced the words with his calloused finger, the letters almost too heavy to believe. Manager, steady salary, health insurance, paid time off. Words that felt foreign, impossible. I don't, his voice caught. He cleared his throat. I don't have a degree. I've never run a team. You've run harder things, Evelyn said gently. Her eyes flicked toward Emma. You've kept her safe. You've kept going when most people would have given up. That's leadership. Jack leaned back, shaking his head. You make it sound noble. It's not. It's survival. And survival, she said, is the noblest thing of all when the odds are stacked against you. He stared at her, heart pounding. No one had ever spoken to him that way. No one had looked at him and seen more than just the grease on his hands, the exhaustion in his eyes. Emma tugged at Evelyn's scarf, babbling happily. Evelyn smiled, adjusting her grip. For a moment it looked so natural, Emma in her arms, the two of them across the table from him, that Jack's throat closed. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. Her smile faded, replaced by something raw. Because I believe in giving people second chances. Because someone once gave one to me, and it changed everything. And because, she hesitated, her eyes softening. Because I trust you. The words landed like a punch and a bomb all at once. Jack looked down at the papers again. Pride screamed at him to push them back, to reject what felt too good, too generous. But another part of him, the part that remembered Emma's fever, Carmen's kindness, Evelyn's steady voice in the storm, whispered that maybe this wasn't pity. Maybe it was possibility. Rain hammered against the windows harder, like the sky itself was waiting for his answer. Finally, Jack exhaled. I'll do it. Evelyn's shoulders eased, relief flickering across her face. Good. She reached across the table, her hand brushing his for the briefest second. It wasn't dramatic, just steady, solid. Jack's pulse jumped. He didn't pull away. That night, the storm followed him home. Jack climbed the stairwell with Emma asleep on his shoulder, the folder tucked under his arm. His boots squelched against the damp floor, and thunder rolled low in the distance. Inside the apartment, he laid Emma gently in her crib, then sat on the couch with the folder open on his lap. The words still didn't look real. Manager, benefits, security. For years, life had been about getting through the next day, the next shift, the next handful of coins. Now, for the first time, the future stretched longer than a week ahead. It scared him, and it thrilled him. He leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling, and whispered, "We're gonna be okay, kiddo." Emma stirred, murmuring in her sleep, as if she'd heard him. 2 days later, Evelyn stopped by the garage again, this time in the middle of the workday. Cameras still lingered outside Heart Baby's headquarters, but she looked less fragile now, like someone who had weathered the storm and chosen not to hide. The drivers greeted her with a mixture of respect and wariness. Jack noticed, but he also noticed how Evelyn didn't flinch. She walked straight to him, Emma toddling at his feet, and said, "Ready for your first official team meeting?" He blinked. "You mean now?" "Yes," she smiled faintly. "No time like the present." And so, with grease still on his hands and his heart pounding, Jack stood before the drivers and cleared his throat. His words were halting at first, but then they steadied. He talked about maintenance schedules, about keeping vans safe for families who depended on their deliveries, about taking pride in the work. When he finished, there was a pause. Then one of the drivers nodded. Another clapped him on the shoulder. Respect this time, without whispers. Jack caught Evelyn's gaze across the garage. She smiled, a quiet, knowing smile, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled back without hesitation. That night, rain still pattered against the city. Jack walked home carrying Emma on his shoulders, her laughter ringing out as she grabbed for raindrops with tiny hands. He thought about the garage, the drivers, Evelyn's words. The storm outside didn't scare him anymore. Because for the first time in years, Jack Carter wasn't just surviving. He was building. The first Saturday of October arrived cool and crisp, the kind of morning that carried the smell of fallen leaves and the faint promise of winter. Jack stood in the garage finishing up paperwork when Evelyn appeared in the doorway. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt this time, simpler, softer, almost unrecognizable compared to the polished CEO he'd seen in boardrooms and headlines. "I was hoping," she said, her voice steady but laced with something vulnerable, "you and Emma might come with me today. There's somewhere I need to go." Jack raised an eyebrow, setting down his pen. "Where?" Her gaze flickered, as if weighing whether to open the door. Then she said quietly, "A place I haven't visited in years. A place I can't face alone." They drove an hour out of the city, Emma babbling in the back seat, clutching her giraffe. The roads narrowed, the skyline fading into stretches of fields, broken fences, and trees already turning gold and crimson. Finally, Evelyn pulled into a cracked asphalt lot in front of a brick building with boarded windows. A faded sign still clung to the front, the letters chipped but readable, "St. Mary's Home for Children." Jack's chest tightened. "This is where I grew up," Evelyn finished. She shut off the engine, her hands lingering on the steering wheel. "At least until the fire." Jack turned sharply. "Fire?" She nodded, her jaw tight. "I was 9. A boy, just a kid himself, pulled me out. I never saw him again, but I kept something. A necklace. It was all I had to prove he was real." She paused, her voice dropping. It had a name engraved on it. J. Carter. Jack's breath caught. His fingers curled against his knees. Emma's laughter broke the silence as she tapped the window, delighted by a squirrel darting across the lot. The sound grounded him, but his pulse thundered in his ears. Inside, the orphanage smelled of dust and old wood, the air heavy with abandonment. Sunlight streamed through cracked panes, catching motes that drifted like ghosts. Evelyn moved slowly, her fingers brushing the walls, her expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. "This was the dining hall," she whispered, standing in a wide room where long tables once sat. We used to line up here, trays in hand, pretending the food was better than it was. A small laugh slipped from her throat, soft, brittle. Emma clung to Jack's leg, her big eyes wide as she took in the echoing emptiness. They moved through the halls, Evelyn narrating fragments of her childhood. Games of tag in the yard, the cracked swings, the smell of chalk in the classrooms. Each memory carried weight, colored by loss but also by resilience. Finally, she led them to a stairwell, its banister charred black. "It started here," she said, her hand hovering just above the burned wood. The fire. Jack's throat tightened. He remembered flames licking at his skin, the suffocating smoke, the sound of terrified cries. He remembered pulling a girl's hand, dragging her through the chaos, refusing to let go. He remembered running into the night with nothing but instinct and fear. And he remembered dropping the necklace in the rush, not realizing until it was too late. Now, decades later, that necklace had found its way back to him. Through her. Evelyn crouched to pick up a piece of charred wood, her fingers trembling. "I used to wonder if I imagined him," she admitted, her voice raw. "This boy who came out of nowhere, who saved me, who vanished before anyone knew his name. But the necklace, your name, proved he was real. For years I told myself if I ever found him, I'd thank him. I'd tell him he changed my life." Jack stood frozen, every word slicing through him. His heart pounded against his ribs and his hands shook at his sides. He wanted to speak, to confess, to tell her the truth. But fear kept his mouth shut. Fear that the moment he spoke, everything fragile they'd built would collapse. Emma toddled forward, tugging at Evelyn's sleeve. Evelyn smiled, gathering the child into her arms. "You're braver than I was," she whispered, kissing Emma's hair. "You don't know what fear is yet. I hope you never do." Jack turned away, his eyes stinging. They stepped outside, the autumn air cool against their faces. The orphanage loomed behind them, silent, scarred, but still standing. "Why bring me here?" Jack asked finally, his voice low. Evelyn adjusted Emma on her hip. "Because you're the only person I trust enough to share this with. You know what it's like to fight shadows, to start over from nothing. I needed someone who wouldn't look at me with pity." Her words landed heavy. Jack stared at her, his chest aching. She didn't know the truth yet, that he wasn't just a witness to her past, he was her past. But maybe, he thought, this was the beginning of her finding out. Evelyn looked back at the orphanage one last time. "That boy gave me my second chance, and I built everything I have because of it. Sometimes I wonder if he's still out there, living a good life. Sometimes I wonder if he even knows he saved me." Jack's throat constricted. He wanted to shout the truth, to tell her that boy was standing right beside her. But instead he reached for Emma's hand, grounding himself in the present. "Whoever he was," Jack said hoarsely, "he'd be proud of what you've done with that second chance." Her eyes met his, glistening. For a moment the silence between them said everything words couldn't. Emma giggled then, holding up her giraffe plush as if presenting it to the world. Evelyn laughed softly, brushing her tears away. "Maybe she's my real second chance now," Evelyn said, kissing Emma's cheek. Jack nodded, his heart torn between truth and silence. They drove back in quiet, the sun setting behind them, painting the horizon gold and crimson. Evelyn's hands gripped the wheel, steady, while Jack sat in the passenger seat, staring at the scrap of necklace memory only he carried. The past had returned, and soon he knew it would demand to be revealed. The week after visiting St. Mary's weighed heavy on Jack. He couldn't shake the image of Evelyn standing in that charred stairwell, her voice trembling as she spoke about the boy who had saved her. About him. Every time he saw her in the garage, laughing softly with Emma, or speaking with calm authority to the drivers, the truth pressed harder against his chest. The longer he stayed silent, the heavier it grew. One night after Emma was asleep, Jack sat at the kitchen table, staring at a shoebox he hadn't opened in years. The cardboard was frayed, the lid dented, but inside were fragments of a life he'd tried to forget. His mother's old Bible, a broken toy truck, a photograph of himself at 8 years old, and the torn shirt sleeve with a burn mark from the night of the fire. He touched the fabric, the smell of smoke still faint, even after all these years. His jaw tightened. It was time. The next day, Evelyn stopped by the garage just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in streaks of orange and violet. She carried 2 coffees and a tired smile. You look like you needed one, she said, handing him the cup. Jack took it, his hands brushing hers. Thanks. His voice was rougher than usual. Evelyn tilted her head, studying him. You've been different since Saturday. Quieter. Jack set the coffee down, wiping his greasy palms on a rag. His chest tightened. This was it. Evelyn, he said, his voice low but steady. There's something you need to know. She frowned slightly, sensing the weight behind his words. What is it? Jack reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the fabric. The burned sleeve. He held it out with shaking hands. Her brow furrowed as she took it. What's this? The shirt I was wearing the night of the fire, Jack said quietly. His eyes locked onto hers, raw and unflinching. I was there. I was the boy who pulled you out. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The hum of the garage lights, the faint laughter of drivers outside, even Emma's babbling in the corner, all of it faded. Evelyn stared at him, her mouth parting in disbelief. No! Her fingers trembled as she touched the charred fabric. You... She stopped, shaking her head, her eyes filling with tears. Jack, are you saying... He nodded once. It was me. I remember the smoke, the heat, the way you wouldn't let go of my hand. I remember dropping the necklace in the rush. His voice broke. I've carried this piece ever since, just to remind myself it was real. That night, it shaped me, just like it shaped you. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her breath unsteady. All these years, I searched. I wondered if you were alive, if you remembered me. And all this time, you were right here. Jack's throat tightened. I didn't tell you because I didn't want it to change things. I didn't want you to see me as that scared kid, or worse, to feel like you owed me anything. She shook her head fiercely, stepping closer. Owe you? Jack, you saved my life. Everything I have, the company, the second chances, even the courage to keep going, it's because of you. I don't owe you. I see you. Jack's vision blurred, but he blinked back the tears. I'm not a hero, Evelyn. I was just a kid who didn't know better than to run into a fire. Her hand found his, gripping tight. And that's what makes you one. For the first time in years, Jack let the weight fall. The secret he'd carried, the silence that had gnawed at him, it was gone. And in its place was something he hadn't felt in decades. Release. Emma toddled over then, her giraffe plush in hand, tugging at Evelyn's sleeve. Evelyn scooped her up, still crying but smiling through it. Do you know what this means? She whispered, kissing Emma's hair. Your daddy didn't just save me once. He gave me my whole future. Jack swallowed hard, his chest aching. He'd never heard words like that spoken about him. Not as a failure, not as a man barely holding it together, but as someone who mattered. They stood there in the fading light of the garage, silence settling between them. Not empty, but full. Later that night, Evelyn came to his apartment. She didn't knock. She just stood at the door, her face still marked with dried tears, but her eyes burning with resolve. I can't stop thinking about it, she said as soon as he opened the door. About how our lives were tied together before we even knew it. About how many times I wished I could thank that boy. And now I can. Jack stepped aside, letting her in. Emma was already asleep, her soft snores filling the room. Evelyn glanced at the crib, her face tender, then turned back to him. You gave me a second chance, she said. Let me give you one too. Jack shook his head. You already have. The job, the trust, the way you've been here for Emma. No, she interrupted, her voice steady but trembling at the edges. This isn't about jobs or trust. It's about something bigger. It's about family, about building something real, together. Her words pierced him. For so long, Jack had been defined by what he lacked: money, stability, certainty. Now, standing in his tiny apartment with this woman who had unknowingly carried his story all her life, he realized maybe he had never been as empty as he thought. Maybe he had just been waiting for this moment. He took a shaky breath. Evelyn, I don't know what the future looks like, but if you're in it, if you're with us, then maybe I'm not so scared anymore. Her smile broke through the tears, radiant and fragile all at once. She reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. And in that simple gesture, something solid formed. Something no headline, no scandal, no shadow of the past could undo. The truth was out, and it had set them free. The weeks that followed the revelation felt like breathing after years underwater. For Jack, the weight of silence had finally lifted. No more hiding. No more carrying the past like a secret scar. Evelyn knew the truth now, that he was the boy who had pulled her through fire and smoke, the reason she had a second chance at life. And she didn't look at him with pity or obligation. She looked at him like a man she trusted, a man she chose to stand beside. For Evelyn, the pieces of her life had finally fallen into place. The boy she had searched for was no longer a memory, no longer a name etched in silver. He was here, flesh and blood, with grease-stained hands and eyes that carried both weariness and strength. He wasn't just her savior from the past, he was her partner in the present. And for Emma, everything simply felt whole. It started small, the way big things often do. One night, Evelyn sat cross-legged on Jack's worn couch, Emma asleep in her lap. The glow of the TV flickered across the room, but neither of them was watching. Evelyn looked at Jack, her voice quiet but steady. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what it means to have a second chance. Not just for us, for other people too. For every parent who's out there struggling the way you were. For every kid who feels invisible the way I did." Jack leaned back, running a hand over his jaw. And I want to do something about it," she said. "Not just donations, not just press releases. Something real, something that carries our story forward." Jack studied her, the words sinking deep. He thought about the nights he'd spent counting coins, the way strangers' eyes had burned with judgment, the exhaustion of surviving alone. He thought about the boy he'd once been, dragging a girl through smoke, desperate not to let go. Finally, he nodded. "Then let's build it." They called it the Second Chance Foundation. Evelyn brought the vision, the resources, the ability to open doors. Jack brought the lived experience, the raw truth of what it meant to be at the bottom and still keep going. Together, they created a mission to help struggling single parents and vulnerable children find the support, dignity, and opportunities they deserved. The first event was modest, just a community fair in a church parking lot with donated clothes, free childcare signups, and hot meals. Jack stood behind a table handing out toolkits for fathers who wanted to fix things around their homes. Evelyn greeted families, crouching low to look children in the eye, listening to their stories. Emma toddled between them with her giraffe plush, making everyone smile. The media showed up, cameras flashing, but this time Evelyn didn't flinch. She stood beside Jack, his arms steady around Emma, and told the story not as a polished CEO, but as a woman who had once been saved by a boy who refused to give up. "This foundation," she said into the microphones, her voice strong but tender, "isn't about charity. It's about dignity. It's about second chances. And it's about remembering that sometimes the smallest acts of courage, the ones nobody sees, can change the course of a life forever." Jack looked at her then, pride swelling in his chest. She wasn't speaking just for herself. She was speaking for him, for Emma, for everyone who had ever felt invisible. Months passed and the foundation grew. A family shelter was renovated. Scholarships were funded. Support groups formed for single parents who finally felt like they had someone in their corner. Jack traded his old coveralls for a suit when he had to, though he still spent most days in the garage, running the Heart Baby vans with the same precision he always had. Evelyn still carried herself with the quiet authority of a leader, but now she smiled more freely, laughed more often, and found her evenings spent on Jack's couch instead of alone in her office. One snowy December night, Jack carried Emma up the steps of a renovated shelter, her mittened hands clutching his neck. Families lined the hall, children chasing each other in the glow of Christmas lights. Evelyn stood at the front, addressing the crowd with warmth and resolve. When she finished, Jack stepped up beside her, his voice lower, rougher, but just as steady. "I used to think asking for help made me weak," he admitted. "But I've learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone stand with you. My daughter and I wouldn't be here without that. And now I want to be that someone for the next person who needs it." The room erupted in applause. Evelyn slipped her hand into his, and for the first time in a long time, Jack didn't feel like he was standing on shifting ground. He felt rooted. That night, back at the apartment, Jack tucked Emma into bed. She held her giraffe plush tight, whispering, "Good night, Daddy." Jack lingered at her side, brushing her hair back, his heart full. When he joined Evelyn in the living room, she was staring at the folder of foundation plans, her expression tender, vulnerable. She looked up, eyes meeting his. You changed my life twice, she said softly. Once when you pulled me out of that fire, and again when you reminded me what really matters. Jack's throat tightened. He sat beside her, taking her hand. We saved each other. They sat in silence, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside, the soft sound of Emma's breathing in the next room. And for the first time in both their lives, the future felt not just possible, but bright.